Hello, everybody. This is Georgianne Hughes, and this is The Bite Show. And tonight, we have got quite a show for you. Bloodsuckers. And wait until you hear this. And, of course, it's Olaf Hage that can tell us all about it. And we're very blessed to have Olaf. He is a premier researcher. Olaf is biblical, ancient history studies, news behind current world issues, just an extraordinary person. Olaf Hage can be reached by writing to him, if you choose, at Post Office Box 427 in Brunswick, Maine, and the abbreviation for Maine is ME. And the zip code is 04011. Visit Olaf's website, TheTimeQuest.com. A wealth of information there, too. And Olaf does have CDs available and DVDs. Just a lot of information.
No DVDs.
No DVDs?
Oh, no, just CDs.
CDs.
Free CDs.
Okay.
And we have some tapes, of course.
Okay. Well, what is this about the bloodsuckers, Olaf?
Well, I know what it sounds like, but we're not going to talk about vampires per se. It's not about vampires. And so all the vampires who've tuned in to listen to to listen to their family history, we could do that on another occasion, but...
yeah, and we can do that,
Story, too.
Yes.
Story. And I should mention, for those who may be new, because they saw bloodsuckers and they're vampires, that The Time Quest is all one word. So TheTimeQuest.com is all one word, no spaces or dashes. Okay. Bloodsuckers. You've all heard about the Holy Blood, Holy Grail story, the Da Vinci Code, and the idea that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were married and had children, and those children are now secretly waiting to take over the world and apparently buys what you eat in your supermarket.
Yeah.
If you've fallen for this, if you've fallen for the Holy Blood myth, what I'm going to tell you is going to open your eyes, I hope, and you'll feel like a bloodsucker, that somebody suckered you into believing in this Holy Blood myth. So that's what I mean by bloodsucker. And the bloodsuckers who are pushing this on us, the people who are trying to make a profit telling you this stuff, know or should know that it's not true. Now, let me begin by planting a major flag on top of the mountain of dispute here. The only text, the only one there is from the ancient world that says anything that would imply that Jesus and Mary Magdalene might have been married, the only one that they cite, the only one that anybody's been talking about, is the Gospel of Philip. Now, there are other texts that make little references to things which they drag into it. I mean, they take the Gospel of John and they drag that in, and they say, well, the marriage feast of Cana was the marriage between Jesus and Mary Magdalene.
Yeah.
We'll get into that. It isn't, obviously. You can tell from the text that it can't be. Look, I won't even tease you about that one. Let me hit that one first out of the park, okay?
Okay.
Jesus is invited with some of his friends to a wedding. Okay, they say, well, that's what they did with the bridegroom. Bridegroom was invited. That's part of the ritual. Oh, really? Okay, well, maybe. But then the guys who are conducting the ceremonies, little jobs like feeding the people and serving the wine and the servants and so forth in the house. Here comes the bridegroom. Okay. Now notice that it says in the text, right there in the text, it says that they talk to the bridegroom and they say, everybody serves the the best wine first and saves the worst for last. You know, they talk about how they've consulted with the bridegroom about this, and they're kind of puzzled because the best wine, theoretically here, was actually served last. In other words, the wine that Jesus had made out of the water. You know that story?
Yes.
So the idea here is that the bridegroom's the one serving the wine, right? He's in charge of the wine at the ceremony. So there's no question about it. The text tells you that. Yet, when it comes to the time where Jesus is to instruct the people who are servants and serving the wine and dealing with the wine jugs, to instruct the servants to put water into them and then pour it out and serve it to the guests.
Right.
Okay? His mother has to tell the servants to do whatever he says. So if he tells you to put wine in the wine jugs, then you must go ahead and do that.
Right.
So let me ask you a question here. If he's the bridegroom, how come his mother has to order the servants to do what the bridegroom wants done with regard to the wine, when the text itself tells us that the bridegroom has ultimate authority there?
Yes.
I have to tell you something. I think Jesus is related to one of the two parties getting married, and of course afterwards would be related to both of them. But it's obviously he's not the bridegroom. Whoever it is, it's not Jesus. Can't be.
I agree.
The story itself clearly indicates that. This is just typical of these people. They will distort, take out of context, misrepresent. All you have to do is go back and read it, and it's clear that that's not Jesus getting married. So he's not the bridegroom. Whoever it is, it's somebody else there. Okay? Now, let me take another example here. This is the Gospel of Philip. This is the text that everybody points to. They say, see, it says right here that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were married. Well, no, it doesn't. See? It never says any such thing. In the New Testament, it refers to a bunch of women who are companions of Jesus on the road. You know, as they're going from place to place, they're companions. In other words, these are women who are going along, and they are ministering to Jesus and the apostles out of their substance. Well, what does that mean? Well, maybe they're carrying a picnic basket. I don't know. Maybe they're helping to pay some of the expenses. Maybe these are rich women who are following Jesus around while their husbands are at work. Maybe a bunch of things. I think it's simply that people don't realize how young the apostles are.
Yeah.
I think Judas was about 13 years old. The traditions about Judas are that he just had a baby, or a baby was born right after the crucifixion that would have been his son, and that it was the family of Jesus actually helped to raise that kid. I think I know who he is, by the way, but we won't get into all that here. And the interesting thing about this is that Judas was probably the youngest of the apostles, but if you look around at the others, they're not much older. If Jesus was born first, and he's got 4 brothers who were mentioned in the text and who seem to be among the apostles, then they have to be under the age of Jesus, and Jesus was, despite what certain people want you to believe, Jesus was less than 33 years old at the time, so they have to be, mostly in their late 20s at best. And you've got some people who are first cousins of Jesus, and people who are related by marriage and so forth, like Peter and Andrew, and they're not much different in age from this group. Most of the people in the group are between roughly 13 and 30. Okay? So these are young men. Now, the women in question here are apparently a generation older. In fact, we can identify some of them. The mother of at least 5 of the apostles is Mary, the mother of Jesus. She's, I shouldn't say 5 of the apostles, so the mother of 4 of the apostles. She's mother-in-law of one of them. Clearly, this family is, the mothers are looking after the kids. Why is that? Because you don't come into your inheritance in the Holy Land until you're 30 years old. So until you're 30, I know this is weird, our society is so different from theirs.
Yeah.
But until you're 30 years old,
You don't have much sense.
yeah, you haven't got anything. You're an apprentice. You're learning. You're going. You're educating. You're under your father's thumb in terms of go fetch that piece of wood for me. I'm going to nail it up. That you're a carpenter or whatever it is. So you're apprenticing, and you can see that some of the apostles are mending nets by the sea, and Zebedee's two sons, James and John, and Jonah's two sons, Andrew and Peter. And so we got four guys who are tired of fishing, and Jesus comes along, and they say, "Hey, Dad, we're going to go walk with Jesus for a while." And he says, "All right, but don't get into trouble, kids." That's Jonah or Zebedee talking. Although, as I understand it, Zebedee had a hot temper because he was called Thunder. That was his nickname. So he probably yelled at the kids, "You get back here before sundown. We got to go fishing tonight." So these kids are following Jesus. They had been following some of them, many of them, John the Baptist. They're young guys. The mothers have the purse strings, so to speak, because the kids aren't yet of age, for the most part. The apostles that were following Jesus are in their teens and 20s. And what that means is that under their system, they weren't going to get any inheritance. And basically, all they got was a day wage from their father, which probably meant they got to eat and live in the house. So, they go off. And it's, not too similar to what goes on today. If you think about it, you're mowing the lawn and you're almost done, and your friends come by in their convertible and they want to go drive it around. Although at $4 a gallon, they probably don't want to do that too much anymore. But anyway, run in and you tell your dad, "Can I finish mowing the lawn later?" Bill and Susie and Jack are here in their convertible, and I want to hop in and go for a ride. Anyway, this is what happened when I was a kid. But that's the kind of thing, and that's really what's going on here. And they're saying, "Hey, Jesus is here. Wow, he's got to go talk about something really interesting. Or this rock band is in town. Can we go listen? Can we go to listen to the rock star? That's come to town. Mick Jagger's on his 99th last tour, and Cher is here for the last time again." So they take off, and they want to. Because Jesus was basically the big entertainer of the time. I mean, really. He was like Barack Obama. He's going around giving speeches. Everybody was turning out, big crowds following him around and want to hear him talk and so forth. It was entertainment for them. They didn't have much else to do. I mean, they weren't like going to go to the movies. This is what they did. And so when Jesus shows up, it was time to go out and take a break from your net mending. So the fact of the matter is that these are young guys. So the women who are accompanying Jesus are of the older generation. These are their kids. They're taking care of them. They're watching over them. They're like chaperoning to make sure they don't get into trouble. And it's like Zebedee says to his wife Salome, who's the sister of Mary, the mother of Jesus. He says to Salome, "Hey, look, why don't you go with James and John so they don't get in trouble? All right, just tag along, just make sure, they're okay. Well, we could be gone several days. Yeah, I know. Take some money with you and watch out, make sure everybody's okay. I just worried about him, that's all. I don't know this Jesus. He's a pretty hot-tempered guy, I heard him doing something to money changes in the temple and stuff, You never know what kind of trouble you're going to get into. The Romans, you're going to need bail money. Here, take a couple of gold pieces. All right, I'll see you in a few days." I mean, that's the kind of situation it was. And when you really put yourself back into that world, you can see that these women who accompanied Jesus and the apostles were older women. They weren't like, these weren't like camp followers, okay? These are like the little girls who go after Barack Obama and fate the aisle,
Yeah.
Sure, the women who are looking after their own sons to make sure they don't get into too much trouble with this rabble-rouser Jesus. And so they're hanging out with them, and of course, Salome's Jesus' aunt, and she basically says, "Okay, I buy into this kingdom thing, but I want to make sure James and John are on either side of you in the kingdom. After all, they're first cousins. They ought to have some rank here." And these other guys, They're only your half-brothers. And they don't even believe you anyway. But James and John, they believe. So I'm going along with this. So this is what I want. So you can just see here. I mean, Salome's an aunt to Jesus, and she must have been, figure at least 15 years older, so she's well into her 40s. She must be about 45. She's not going to have any more children at that point, so she's worried about the ones she's already had, because in those days, all you had to do walking along the road was get a bad, stumble and get a bad cut or injury, gets infected. They didn't have antibiotics. You died. So, she wanted to be there if anything happened to one of her sons. And this is just typical of the women. And we've got Susanna and Joanna. And obviously, the indications are that there's somebody important. I think one of them was married to a treasurer of Hage.Typhon. Clearly, that's not a young girl. That's a responsible position. So we must assume that she's an older woman also. Mary was an older woman. It sounds as though we got a bunch of older women here. And to assume that Mary Magdalene's the only kid in the block, I don't think so. I think these are all women of the same basic age. And you can tell that. In the Gospel of John, and in the Gospels in general, at the time of the crucifixion, it talks about the mother of Jesus and the other Mary, Mary Magdalene. Or it talks about Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, meaning the mother of Jesus. Okay, the other means there's just two of them. There's two Marys. And they distinguish them by various methods. And they'll refer to Mary by her sons, James and Joseph, indicating her eldest and her youngest. That's Jesus' mother. Or they will indicate, don't just call her the other Mary. So you're supposed to know who they're talking about. They've only identified one other Mary, so, it's got to be whichever one they're not talking about, So at the time of the crucifixion, John's Gospel tells us that at the cross were these three women and that were present. We know Salome was there. All the Gospel accounts kind of name women who were present at the crucifixion, but there's some women named. And in John's Gospel, he talks about Mary Magdalene, and he talks about Mary, the mother of Jesus, and then he talks about her sister. Now, the normal assumption would be that that's Salome. On the other hand, the way it's phrased, people say, well, it looks like it's actually talking about another sister named Mary. Now, that would be really stupid if you were naming your kids to give them the same name, unless, of course, you're George Foreman. He named all his sons George. But if you are, in fact, living in the Holy Land at the time, you're going to name somebody with a different name because there's no last names there. So you got to give them a different name to distinguish them. So the idea that there are two Marys in the same family is just hogwash. They just did not do that. Now, they might give you a nickname version. So you might have, say, three daughters, Anna, Joanna, and Susanna. Okay, three versions of Anna, if you will. And that's entirely possible. But you're not going to name three women Mary. You're just not going to do that. You might name one Mary Ann or Mary Amne, and another one Mary, and so forth. You might give variations out. But to use the same name over and over like that would be just stupid because there's no last name. So it's not Mary Johnson. There's no way to distinguish one Mary from another other than by saying, well, it's Mary of Bethany. Well, Mary of Bethany has got to be a different Mary than another Mary of Bethany. You follow me? So you got two Marys of Bethany, then you got a problem. So you got to call her something else. Then you call her, Georgianne or something. You got to come up with some
Leave me out of this.
Oh yeah, I'll leave you out of it. So it's the idea that Mary Magdalene is somebody that's of a younger generation is shot out immediately because when you go back and you look at this text in John in the Greek text, in all versions of it, Those of you who read the New Age versions by Gail Riplinger, all Greek versions say, no matter how far back you go, that it's really talking about Mary, the mother of Jesus, and her sister, Mary Magdalene. Now, she's not her sister. She is her sister-in-law. She's in the same generation as Mary, the mother of Jesus, just like all these other women, Salome and Joanna and so forth. These women are all of the same generation. They're going around. I mean, it's just a group of women. You just imagine a garden party where all the women are about the same age, and they're watching their kids play out in the yard. I mean, that's sort of the relationship here, okay? So Mary Magdalene was of the same generation as Mary. She was like a sister-in-law. They didn't have the term sister-in-law, so they just said sister. But it's clear what they are indicating here. In fact, there are places in the New Testament where a wife is called a sister, even though she's not a sister, biologically. That's what they're really saying is that it's a woman of the same basic age, the same generation, who's related to you. But see, the word sister has a different meaning in our language than it did in theirs. So what we've got here is Mary Magdalene would be, therefore, 10, 15, 20 years older than Jesus. She's not the same age as Jesus. And accordingly, when you're thinking about this relationship here, the idea that Jesus would be espoused to marry this older woman and so forth doesn't make any sense. And she wouldn't be sister-in-law to his mother. She would be daughter-in-law to her. See, so the term in John's Gospel eliminates the idea that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were married. Can't be. Okay, so that's out. So again, if you read the text carefully, it's just not possible. Okay, let me get to the Gospel of Philip here, and I'll come back to John in a little bit because there's more to talk about there. Gospel of Philip. In the Gospel of Philip, they say, well, it says that she's his companion. Yeah, along with all these other women, including his own mother. Was he married to his mother? Was he married to his Aunt Salome? They're all called companions in the New Testament. That's clearly what they're writing about here in this passage. Now it says he kissed her, and the apostles were jealous. And the apostles wanted Jesus to do to them what he was doing to her in terms of paying attention to them. See, you can see that clearly from the passage there in the Gospel of Philip, if it were true. I mean, we're just assuming that this actually happened and that the guy who wrote this Gospel of Philip text in the 3rd century, it's a 3rd century Gnostic essay, by the way. It's not a gospel, and it's not by Philip. And it isn't written in the 1st century, so you think about it, why anybody would pay attention to it at all is a mystery. But, nevertheless, there's this 3rd century writer in Egypt, the only place we got this text from, one place, Nag Hammadi, no place else. And in there, we have this unknown 3rd century Gnostic teacher who's writing an essay, and he happens to, in passing, talk about Jesus, Mary Magdalene, and the apostles being jealous. He said, supposedly, he claims, the Gnostic writer claims, that Jesus had said to the apostles, I love her differently than I love you. I have a different relationship with her. Of course he does, because she's technically, if you think about it, is like an aunt or a stepmother to him. So he's got a different relationship with them. They're of his generation. They're guys, and she's got a problem. And I believe, and so do, by the way, a lot of the Holy Blood, Holy Grail people, that the woman caught in adultery is Mary Magdalene. There's been a lot of controversy over that. But if she is, then they come to Jesus because he has a right legally to judge her. Now, it's true, a husband would have such a right. But you know who else has a right? An adopted or legal son has a right because he stands to inherit. See, her dowry, if she should die before her husband, her husband inherits the dowry, and then when her husband dies, any son, biological or adopted, inherits the dowry. So this is all about dowry law. Okay, you've got to understand that there are several people who have a claim on that dowry. Her father, her husband, and certainly her firstborn legal son or heir, who would be the primary inheritor, and any other sons. All of these can judge her. All of these can accuse her. And when you accuse her, you stand in a position to, depending on what happens, to move the inheritance of the dowry around. So, for example, if she's divorced by her husband for cause, the dowry can stay with the husband. If he just divorces her without cause and she's not guilty of adultery, then the dowry reverts to her father. And he can pay it out to get her married to somebody else then, although nobody would probably marry her in those days after that. If the mother and father died, then the son would inherit the dowry. I mean, various permutations here would happen. So, what we've got here is a case where you can come to Jesus and you can say, well, your stepmother or somebody who you would inherit from because her husband has made you his chief heir, has adopted you, or something of that sort. He isn't here. He's out traveling somewhere, buying tin in Britain. He's in India getting brass. He's not here right now. And so we're going to ask you to pass judgment on her. And so Jesus starts writing about the sins and shortcomings and secrets in the dirt there with his finger of the members of the Sanhedrin and the priests and so forth who come there to accuse him. Well, now, wouldn't it be interesting if her husband were Joseph of Arimathea, the man who tradition says adopted Jesus? Because if that's the case, Joseph of Arimathea is on the council. He would have told Jesus a lot of the stories about what was going on, and Jesus would have known that there were people on the council who were also guilty of adultery and a lot of other things. And so he could start writing down things in the dirt. One by one, they peel off as they realize Jesus knows their secret. And slowly but surely, they're all gone. And then Jesus stands up and he says, gee, where's the guy who was accusing you? And Joseph of Arimathea, her husband's out of town. Mary, at this point, would say, well, there's nobody here, Lord. And he says, well, and I don't accuse you either. Go and sin no more. No more adultery. Okay, no more fooling around, which in those days meant getting hugged or kissed by somebody who wasn't your husband, and not a family member. Some guy who, could be a potential mate, in other words. So for her to be hugging and kissing Jesus, would imply, if she were a potential mate of Jesus, would imply an adulterous condition unless she were his wife. But if she's his wife, then the Gospel of Philip is nonsense, because here the apostles are complaining about Jesus showing affection to his own wife.
Yeah.
What a lot of chutzpah. I mean, really.
Yeah.
Okay. Paul, in writing his epistles, he mentions that he has a right to have a wife with him as he goes, a sister he calls her, as he goes preaching, like the brothers of the Lord and the other apostles. Okay? Well, isn't that interesting? They have wives, and they have them with them as they go preaching and teaching and go into foreign countries. They take their wives with them. And Paul's complaining, hey, I got a right to do that. I can have a wife with me as I go preaching in Bithynia or Greece or Rome or Britain or wherever he might go. I can have my wife with me. I got a right to do that. I got a right to be married. We people who are apostles and chief elders of the church and so forth, we have a right to be married. Take our wives with us as we go and perform our preaching duties. Take that, those of you who think that priests have to be celibate.
Yeah.
There it is, right there in your Bible. No, they don't. In fact, they have a right to be married, okay? But in the Catholic Church, they have priests who are married. They do. okay? But if you belong to a rite or ritual in the church of celibate priests, then you take a vow of celibacy before you become a priest. But you could also join the Eastern rite, and then you get married and have kids, and, have a house in the suburbs, and, get your mortgage raised by the banks, and, get evicted like anybody else, instead of living in the rectory, where you don't have to worry about that. But unfortunately, the apostles here in the Gospel of Philip, they're complaining because, obviously, not because they want Jesus to kiss them and have sex with them and have children with them and marry them, which is this silly interpretation the holy bloodsuckers are giving us.
Yeah, it's really ridiculous.
It's absurd, yeah.
Yeah.
But, and I don't know of any real scholar, who says this. This is just these people are writing little paperback books and saying this, making little documentaries and saying this. But, the Gospel of Philip there is clearly indicating that this is a concern about the attention and time that Jesus is devoting to her, and they want him to spend more time preaching and teaching them. And they think that and in fact, Karen King is probably the biggest scholar out there on this particular text. She said that kissing here refers to sharing mystical secrets, that he's whispering in her ear, not kissing her on the lips, but as you were kissing her in the ear, that is whispering secrets to her. And the apostles theoretically here would be complaining, hey, what are you whispering to her? Why don't you whisper the same thing to us? And Jesus is basically saying back to them, look, she needs special instruction that you guys butt out of this. This is between her and me, okay? She needs a certain encouragement here, or she's going to go out and fornicate again. So you just knock it off. This isn't your problem. She's got a husband who's traveling all over the world buying metal here and metal there and trying to make armor for the Roman army and for King Herod and stuff. Just knock it off. Leave her alone. Okay, so if this has any historical basis, that's what the text would be about. Now, there's a whole bunch of scholars over in Europe. Now, if you're looking for liberal scholars, you're going to find them over there.
Oh, boy, that's true.
You know what they say about this passage? They say that the word companion there isn't even referring to Mary Magdalene, that it's referring to the preceding verse, that it belongs in the preceding passage. This is Coptic. Remember, this is not an English text here. It's written in a dialect of Egyptian and using the Greek alphabet. It's a complex thing. I've got the text in Coptic, and I'm able to read it, actually, oddly enough. But, with a little difficulty. But you can read it. It's not that hard. You got a Greek dictionary and you got a Hebrew dictionary, and if you got a Strong's Concordance, you got one of each of those in the back. You can make it through the Coptic. It's not that hard because the Coptic language is kind of a Hebraic language. The alphabet's a Greek alphabet. Yeah, it's not that hard. If you can get through your Greek and Hebrew text using Strong's Concordance, then you can get through the Coptic text of Philip. But anyway, if you look at this text, apparently the way the scholars are reading it now in Europe, one day we'll have courageous scholars here too. They're saying that it's the preceding verse that the companion reference, koine, means common person, which is kind of weird, but it means just somebody you hang out with on a regular basis. It doesn't mean wife, by the way. That's not the meaning of the word. So anyway, he says, or they're saying, I should say, that, and I'm not saying all European scholars, there are some who are exceptions, but the mainstream big scholars over there, they're saying now that the reference is not to Mary Magdalene, but to the spirit of Sophia, or wisdom, that accompanied Jesus when he went preaching, that he had the spirit of wisdom as his companion on the road. And so they're going back to the preceding verse. If you've got the text in English, you can kind of figure out what they've done, even though you can't see the Coptic and see how they connected it grammatically. Now, in the original Coptic, most of the words for Mary Magdalene are there's just like half the letters or less still there. Now, a lot of it's missing. And it's not because somebody's trying to censor it. Every part of that corner of every page is full of what we call lacuna, or missing letters and stuff, because the book was damaged when it was being fought over by some I don't know what you would call them, some Egyptian people back in the 1930s, when it was announced in 1945, but they actually found it years before, and these different factions were fighting over it and killing each other over it. And as they were doing this, it obviously didn't survive as well as it should have. So we don't have the text perfect. All right. So a lot of this particular portion is damaged. So when it says he was kissing her on the lips or on the mouth, the scholars in the very first edition stuck in the word mouth there. Okay. It turns out that upon reflection, about 3 years later, the same scholar who put the word mouth in took it out and left it blank because it's not in the text. And he realized that, number one, he might be wrong, and number two, that people were jumping to a sexual interpretation of it. And he realized that was incorrect, that that's not the proper interpretation of it. And so knowing that it's not a sexual passage, but that people were dumb enough to think that it was, he changed it to make sure, because the Holy Blood, Holy Grail book had come out, they were starting to misrepresent this passage. He changed it to make sure that nobody would misunderstand what the text said. But his original version, where he just inserted the word mouth in English in his translation, has now gone round the world. So now everybody thinks that the text actually reads that Mary Magdalene was the wife of Jesus and he used to have sex with her in front of the apostles every day. I mean, that's how people seem to be interpreting it. But that's not true. I mean, the text doesn't say anything about any kind of sexual relationship. The apostles are jealous of the relationship. It's not about sex, folks. So, and as I say, scholars now think that the companion reference may be to Sophia. But let's pretend that Jesus is married to some other woman, like Mary of Bethany, okay, or some other lady, okay, who may be, according to most of the interpretations out there historically, Mary of Bethany is Mary Magdalene, so it can't be her. But maybe he's married to Charlotte from Bethpage or somebody, I'm making up somebody, folks. So we'll say he's married to Charlotte, okay? Did he have any kids? Well, the Gospel of Philip flat out says that Jesus had no sons, that he had no heirs, okay? So,
gee, that's going to disappoint a lot of those New Age scholars.
Yeah. In those days, if you had children at all, they referred to your sons. In fact, the women in the Christian New Testament are going to be sons of God. They're reckoned as sons of God. So you've got to understand how these people thought. Okay, but here's even something more juicy. The Gnostic author of the Gospel of Philip is a celibate. And he's a celibate because he believes Jesus was a celibate. He's promoting celibacy because he believes that that's what Jesus wanted, and that was the example that Jesus gave. So if you get out of that one little section of the Gospel of Philip and read the rest of that essay, you will discover that this guy believes that Jesus was not only not married and didn't have children, but that the reason was because he believed in celibacy. Now, that puts the whole thing in a whole different ballpark there. So the Gospel of Philip is the only text you've got to really look at, and it's telling you basically the opposite of what these people are saying. Well, remember that you're not looking at Bible scholars here. None of the people who wrote any of these books, Dan Brown's certainly no Bible scholar. He admits he only researched this subject for a few months before he wrote his novel. And what did he read? He read Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and the Templar Revelation, and other books that were written by non-scholars and so forth. So his sources, none of them were really, so far as I can tell, anything that you want to cite for this kind of material. None of them were scholarly sources. He's got basically gossip and rumor in paperback books that came out, in the 80s and 90s that he was using. Time he writes the book, the people at the Priory of Zion have already stated that a bunch of the material that he's relying on was fabricated, were forged documents, and some of this they admitted in open court under oath. So they had acknowledged by the time Dan Brown comes along to write the Da Vinci Code that the Da Vinci Code's assumptions and statements weren't true, that they had made it up, and they had forged genealogies and documents and stuff and put them into the library and so forth, that this was all part of a scheme that they were going through to try to get some government assistance from the French government back in the 50s and 60s, back when Charles de Gaulle was running France. So, I mean, this whole thing blew up first in 1967 when the scandal of the fake documents started to come out in France. And that was before Holy Blood, Holy Grail was written in 1980. So even the authors of Holy Blood, Holy Grail, had they bothered to do their homework, or maybe they did, because if you look at the book, it's full of footnotes and stuff. If they really had done their homework, they would know that the story was fake, and it wasn't true. And again, if Dan Brown, I mean, he had the Internet. I mean, you can kind of forgive Lincoln and Bajent and Lee, the authors of Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and even the Templar Revelation authors, Clive Prince and his co-authoress. You can, Lynn Pickman, you can forgive them because they didn't really have the Internet when they were doing their work. But my goodness, Dan Brown, the Da Vinci Code was published in 2003. He had all kinds of Internet tools to work with. He had Google. It would have taken him 5 minutes to find out that this was nonsense. But hey, why spoil a good novel? Or a bad novel in this case. Why spoil a bad story in fiction by telling the truth?
Yeah.
So now I got to bring us a little bit up to date here. I want to go back, though, first of all. I want to lay all the groundwork with the facts and the evidence so you can see how stupid it is to jump to this conclusion. All right? Gospel of John. If Jesus is the one who is, as I believe he is, the adopted son-in-law of Mary Magdalene, that this is, in fact, his mother by law, as opposed to biological law. Okay, the sister-in-law of his mother. And the reason for this, I'm going to explain, is really simple. You go back to the Gospel of Matthew. Look at that genealogy there. You'll see a guy in there named, depending on your translation, how they do it, it's Jeconiah or Coniah, is in the ancestry of Joseph, the carpenter, the husband of Mary. That guy got a curse on his head. Anybody in his family line that is cursed is not allowed to sit on the throne of David. If he had adopted Jesus as his son, Jesus cannot be the Messiah. Nobody, not his brothers, not anybody, would have taken him seriously. Everybody would have immediately said, hey, you're an adoptive descendant of Jeconiah. The law says you're cursed. You can't sit on the throne of David. You're a faker. You're a liar. Get out of here. We're not paying any attention to you. And nobody would have followed him. Now, so what happened? Somebody else adopts Jesus. You turn to the Gospel of Luke. There's a totally different genealogy there, Josh McDowell. If you couldn't read, you'd see that. It's a totally different genealogy all the way through. Okay? Some of the names are a little similar because, hey, look at there. Joanna, Susanna, Anna, that's the way they did things. But they're not the same names. Matthat is not the same thing as Matthias. Okay? There's a different names. And when you go through and you look at the two genealogies, you realize there's somebody missing from the Luke genealogy. It's Jeconiah, the guy with the curse. There's no curse on that line. So tradition has said, early church tradition on down to the present time, and modern scholars accept, that these are two different sides of the family, that this is Mary's side of the family. These are Mary's people here. whereas Joseph's people are in the first genealogy. In other words, the bloodline. I like the word bloodline. Here we go, folks. The bloodline of Jesus was free of Jeconiah and his curse. But the husband of Mary was not. So for Jesus to be adopted into the male side of the line of David, he had to be adopted by a guy whose bloodline was free of the Jeconiah curse. And that guy is Joseph of Arimathea, who is, I believe, clearly the brother of Mary, the mother of Jesus. They've got the same bloodline. And because, you see, it says right there in the text, Jesus was, as was supposed, the son of Joseph. So everybody says, well, everybody thought that he was the son of Joseph the carpenter. Oh, look at the Greek text. That's the English translation. Oh, boy, I'll tell you, so there's a circle of hell reserved for translators.
Yeah.
Translators.
You know, when the resurrection and the rewards, I can just imagine what some of their rewards are going to be.
Oh, boy. That word, as was supposed, that little phrase there, the Greek actually says by custom or by law.
Yeah.
And so is referring to adoption. And then it lists people in the Septuagint genealogy, including an error from the Septuagint. Now, if the text is inspired, that passage can only be inspired if it's copied from a legal document that had the error in it. You follow me? In other words, this isn't God saying that this is the genealogy. This is Luke copying a text of adoption papers, a formal genealogical adoption document. And in that document is an error. And it goes back at the time of the flood. It's Canaan being the son of Shem, which is incorrect. He's the son of Ham. So there is an error that's copied over from the Septuagint Greek text. So somebody used that text, and they copied it into this adoption papers. Okay, but we don't care about that part. We only care about the part from David on down to Jesus, and Abraham on down to Jesus. That part doesn't have errors in it. See, that one's okay. But the part before that, taken from the Septuagint, and which Luke accurately and truthfully and perfectly copies down, you follow here. There's no error in the sense that he copied it accurately. Luke did it right, but the text that he was copying had this error in it that's in the Septuagint. It's an accurate copy of the Septuagint copied into a legal document, and the legal document accurately copied into Luke's gospel and inserted into the text by Luke. And we can tell that it's been inserted there because you can take it out, and the text of Luke flows quite nicely from what was just before it to what comes just after it. He's actually stuck that in. He just ripped open his scroll and pasted it in another section where he had this text that he came into possession of. Somebody in the family said, here are Jesus' adoption papers. Do you have any use for this in your gospel? And he says, yeah, I know where I can stick that in. I'll stick it in at about the time that Jesus became age 30, because that's when you come into your inheritance. See? So when Jesus began to be about 30 years of age, he became by law, by adoption, the son of Joseph of Arimathea, the son of Eli, or Heli, the son of so forth, all the way back up. Okay, Eli Joachim, the father of Joseph of Arimathea, and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Salome, the mother of James and John. See, it's a family. And those people are the family genealogy that you see there. So it's not clear where Luke got it from, but obviously it comes from, people like Mary Magdalene or Joseph of Arimathea or somebody like that. And they may have given a copy of it to Mary, the mother of Jesus, because after all, they were, adopting her son. So said, here, you need a copy too, so they made a copy for her. So maybe Luke got it from her. He's got a lot of information from Mary in this text. So what you see here, now I know we're going to have to go to a second file. I can see that right away here. But what's going to happen here is that the adoption papers are in there, They're going to be misunderstood by some modern people who are going to read these as saying, as was supposed, thinking that they're talking about Joseph the carpenter. No, 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 no. Not that side of the family. It's the Mary side of the family, the mother's side. And once you understand that, you can see that when we're talking about Jesus as the adoptive son of Joseph of Arimathea, and and of course he's called his uncle, and he is his uncle, because he's the brother of Mary. That makes perfect sense, because Jesus would have been in needing some kind of legal adoption into the line of David to be able to declare himself Messiah, in order to be able to sit on that throne. And so what better guy than the guy who had the honored seat or chief seat on the Sanhedrin of the house of David, of the house of Judah? That's the guy you want to have adopt you, not some old carpenter from Bethlehem. You want the guy who's the big cheese with the line of inheritance, and that's the guy who adopts him. And so you can see there, he's both his uncle and his adoptive father, the guy who's the Joseph in Luke's Gospel. And his wife, then Mary Magdalene, we know is married to him because she's the sister-in-law of Mary, and the only brother we know she had, apparently, would be then this Joseph of Arimathea. There's no other brother of Mary, the mother of Jesus, indicated, so the only possible sister-in-law that we could have here for Mary Magdalene would be through her marrying this uncle of Jesus on his maternal side, Joseph of Arimathea. All the pieces will fit together that way. If you move Joseph, like some people have tried to do, to the father's, that is to say, the carpenter's side of the family. Oh, there were two men named Joseph on that side of the family. Right, here we go with the two Marys, and now we got two Josephs. And if you believe that, I got some swampland down in Florida I want to tell you. But anyway, this Joseph couldn't be of that side of the family, because if he was, Jesus had no legal adoption into the house of David. He was a fatherless kid who had no line of adoption and no line of inheritance. And then you've got another problem, which is that if he's the elder brother, as they claim, of Joseph, or even the father, uncle of Mary, the mother of Jesus, okay, you put him up another generation back, then the line of inheritance deviates away from Joseph of Arimathea, deviates away from Mary, and she no longer has the line of inheritance to pass on to Jesus. If he's an older brother or uncle to her, and he's sitting in the honored seat of the Sanhedrin, then Jesus can't be the Messiah that way. It just doesn't work again. He's got to be, as the text clearly states, the early traditions of the church clearly state, he has to be younger than Mary. If it weren't so, Jesus is not the Messiah. Can't inherit. You see the problem here? All these people, they don't want Jesus to be who he was. So they go around, they fiddle with all of these texts. But the only way for Jesus to be whom all these people said he was, and died in many cases, martyr's death to defend his claims, the only way for that to have been true is if Joseph of Arimathea were the younger brother of Mary and adopted Jesus as his legal heir, and he had no other sons who could claim his line of descent, that Jesus was at the very least his eldest claimant. Okay, so there's no way it can be any other way legally, where Jesus can't be the guy that everybody was dying for. You see, so it has to be that way. Otherwise, none of these stories, on down into the 2nd century, we have family members being martyred over this and so forth. None of that would make any sense unless the genealogy works the way I just described it. And that means that this sister-in-law, Mary Magdalene, of Mary, the mother of Jesus, has to be married to Joseph of Arimathea. You see, they're just like pieces on a puzzle. They only fit a certain way. You try to force-fit them. Sometimes it sort of looks like it fits, but then you try to put another piece in and it doesn't work. So you got to take that first piece out and try it a different way. Well, that's what we got here. Once you get all the pieces fitting together, there's no other way to look at it than to say that Jesus' aunt by Joseph of Arimathea adopts him and she becomes a stepmother to him, and that's Mary Magdalene. So she's not his wife. There's no indication Jesus married anybody. The only indications we have from these early documents is that he was celibate, that he didn't have any wife, and so forth. Now, go to the Gospel of John, last thing, and then we'll probably have to go to another file here. But in the Gospel of John, Mary comes up to him, Mary Magdalene, his stepmother, and if she's the woman caught in adultery, she's under house arrest, practically. She's legally bound to do whatever Jesus tells her to do, unless Jesus dies, in which case she's free to walk across the street and visit the cemetery where he's buried. But she's basically under house arrest until Joseph of Arimathea comes back to town, to look after her. And they may be estranged as far as their marriage is concerned, because she's living, with her brother and sister again, so she's kind of out of the house, if you follow me here. So she's in a very peculiar position, and she comes to Jesus after the resurrection, and she doesn't recognize him at first. This is her husband, and she can't recognize him. She thinks he's the gardener.
Yeah.
Tell me something. You moved the tulip beds around like I ordered you to the other day? And, hey, where's the body of Jesus? Where'd you put that? She thinks he's the gardener, all right? I'll tell you something. Even in the dark, you can tell. When my wife was alive, if she were there, I would know who it was, just from the way she carried herself, the general,
her demeanor.
Yeah, you know. You've been married to somebody, you know who it is.
Oh, sure.
You're not going to be mistaken about which one, whether that's your wife or not, or your husband in this case. So anyway, she calls him Rabboni, which means, of course, that she thinks he's really skinny. No, I'm sorry. People say, it means that she thinks he's a rabbi. No. Rabboni means my master, the guy in charge, my Lord, the one who is bossing me around, the one who has legal authority over me while I'm in house arrest for being caught in adultery. That's what it means. It means a guy who's got power over me, who saved my butt when they were going to stone me to death, and who said, well, okay, look, I'm heir to the dowry here. I have the right to let you go, but only under my authority till your husband gets back from, Japan or wherever he's going to get better swords, So the thing was that Mary Magdalene basically was under the authority of Jesus, not because she was his wife, but because she was essentially under a kind of house arrest, under his custody, because he basically had said, look, parole her into my custody here. I'll see to it she doesn't get into trouble, otherwise the bail is sacrificed. She's out on bail. She's in kind of a gray area. They didn't really judge her. It wasn't a final decision in the case there. By the time Jesus said, go and sin no more, there was nobody there.
Yeah.
So the guys accusing her weren't there. The text tells you that. So if this is Mary Magdalene, as most of these people think it was, then clearly you have a reason why she's calling him Rabboni, my Lord or my Master, because he is. He's her parole officer. Okay? Now, in chapter 7 and 8, that's where we are here. We were talking about the stoning incident. In chapter 7 in John's Gospel, they are talking about Jesus, speaking of rabbi here, and they're saying, how is it that this man has learning? How is it that he knows his letters, understands literature, has read these texts, knows about the secrets that are hidden in the manuscripts and stuff, when he has never studied? You can't be a capital R rabbi, a teacher who supposedly had to be married. You can't be that if you've never studied. So it flat out is telling you he's not a formal rabbi.
Right.
Flat out telling you that. The same gospel everybody points to for all this Mary Magdalene material is telling you, the same one with the word Rabboni in it, is telling you that he's not a rabbi. So the word Rabboni there cannot be understood as meaning my rabbi. She's saying to him, my master, which is what rabbi means, to rob, to rule over in Hebrew. Rabbe, I know it's the same word in English, so it's a little confusing. To rob somebody is to rule over them, or rape. We get all kinds of words derived from this term. Believe it or not, rabbi be interpreted as robber or rapist or any other thing that involves one person dominating or ruling over another. Okay? So that's where all those words come from, and that's what it means. That's the essential meaning of the term. It doesn't mean professor or scholar. It doesn't mean head of a synagogue. It means to be the person who has authority over someone or is dominating or ruling over someone. Okay? So in that sense, yes, indeed, he had some authority over her, but not as husband, because he had saved her from being stoned to death. He was in charge of her behavior. He was one that she owed everything to. So naturally, she's kissing his feet. He saved her from being stoned to death.
Yeah.
Her life depends on this guy. Jesus could, with a sweep of his hand, have her stoned any time he feels like it. She's buttering him up, you know. She's and he's trying to tell her, look, don't do that. I mean, don't be so, don't be so wishy-washy here. You know, and show some backbone. Stand up to these guys. You know, you're always trying to play up to men, and you need to realize that you can't do that, or you get into these accusations of adultery. You know, you're hugging some guy, and so when people get the wrong idea, they're going to think you're my wife. Knock it off.
Yeah.
You know, so I imagine the things. I mean, he probably didn't say it to her in so many words, but you know, that's the kind of personality she was. She was very overly demonstrative and affectionate. It's obvious, you know, and she does it in public. And at one point, Simon the Pharisee says, "If you knew what kind of woman this was, why you wouldn't let her touch you." I know what kind of woman she is, Simon. I saved her from getting stoned to death. You know, just relax. Chill out, man. So this is a woman that had some problems. Very dependent upon men. Very interested in pleasing them. She's a man pleaser. And, Jesus wants to keep her around him because she knows he'll be safe with him because he's a celibate. He's not going to touch her. But if she fools around with any other guy, if he pushes her away, what's she going to do? She's going to latch on to some other guy. And then she'll get in trouble again. And she'll get stoned, and then where are we? So he's trying to educate her. He's trying to, she needs this affection. She needs this attention. She needs a lot of attention. Okay, that's why she gives it, because she needs it. This relationship that she has with Jesus. Jesus uses this as an opportunity to try to strengthen her morally and spiritually so that she'll be able, after he's gone, to fend for herself and survive without falling prey again to the temptations and the problems that she fell into before. It's what they call, they teach pastors in ministry school about what they call the counseling trap, where a needy woman like this wants counseling and advice all the time, so the pastor counsels her, and they get more and more intimate. She starts crying. He puts his arm around her, and the next thing he knows, they're having sex, So this is and I know I'm rushing that relationship there to make a point. And I have had to counsel pastors and things about these problems, and I know what they go through. It's very difficult because there are a lot of women out there who target pastors.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And I've even had women come after me in this situation. So I know what this is all about. And it's very difficult, and you have to be really, really circumspect, and you got to really keep people at arm's length. And sometimes you have to get really nasty to keep them away, because they gravitate toward power, they gravitate toward fame, and they gravitate toward men who seem to have that. And there's a lot of that there, and so you get you get very. I think a lot of men who get into this field get very defensive almost. Jesus knew that he could resist, that he had the strength of character to stand up to this kind of problem, but most men don't. I mean, it's very hard to deal with. All right, most men are hard. They can't even read the woman, but Jesus could. I mean, he could understand where she was coming from. He knew her heart. And so he knew what the problem was, and he knew that by allowing her to go ahead and show this affection toward him, he was giving Mary Magdalene the opportunity to basically vent her emotional energy on a target that wasn't going to get her into sexual trouble, and that was a safe thing for her to be doing. So he said, leave her alone, let her do it, trust me, this is all for the best. And besides, what she's doing to prepare me for burial. In other words, she's anointing me with this oil. She brought out the family anointing oil, which was handed down, and this is a very sacred relic that she's anointing him with. It's actually the precious nard. If you look at the actual text, it says the genuine nard, which implies that it is the actual genuine anointing oil, and therefore may be the very anointing oil brought by the Magi that had been captured by Nebuchadnezzar from the temple in Jerusalem, because nobody else had been anointed, and handed back to the family whose right it was. After the family of Jesus got it, they realized it belonged to that family. And indeed, when Mary Magdalene married into Jesus' family, I mean, she could have claimed it as part of the dowry exchange and so forth. There's a passage in the Talmud that says that there's this guy who has these two daughters, Mary and Martha, her sister Martha, and that they got a brother also. And it says that when she was married in the first century, her dowry was the biggest dowry, 1 million gold pieces in the history of Jerusalem, the biggest ever. So she had to have married an extremely wealthy guy, and the wealthiest man of the times was Joseph of Arimathea. Yet another clue indicating that that's who she was married to. So they had a lot of money. There's no question about it. They follow the apostles around. She's got money coming out of her ears, for God's sake. She got tons of cash. 1 million gold pieces. You know what that'd be worth today? 1 million gold pieces is almost $1 billion. She's a billionaire. This is like having Martha Stewart walking around handing out money to you, This is like Oprah Winfrey's joining the apostles, And she likes Barack, the apostle Barack, She's got to give him some money.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the kind of people who are following them around. And Mary, the mother of Jesus, is the sister of the richest guy in town. So, in fact, Joseph of Arimathea was considered one of the richest men in the world at the time. So clearly, we're looking at a very, very wealthy bunch of women. And when they're following, and her sister, sister of Joseph of Arimathea also is Salome. And if you read the text carefully, her husband owns a whole bunch of fishing boats. He was probably worth at least $1 million. He wasn't a poor man either. So these are not poor people, okay? You hear all this stuff about poor fishermen. That's to get poor people to put money in the little collection basket on Sunday.
Oh, yeah.
Because they want you to believe these guys are all poor, starving waifs, living hand to mouth. And even they gave what they had to Jesus and so forth. No, these are wealthy millionaires and billionaires. Poor. Jesus wasn't living off the poor. He condemned people who lived off the poor, like the Pharisees who took the widow's mite, which was all she had, and took her house over a pretense, and over some legal problem. They stole her house from her and so forth, like foreclosed on her house.
Yeah.
Yeah, he condemns that. He's not in favor of that. Trying to make Jesus out to be some guy like these modern, millionaire evangelists who want to collect tithes from the poor.
Yeah.
No, that's not what Jesus did. So anyway, he said to the rich man, "Hey, you're a rich man? Well, you give all your money to the poor."
Yeah, he did say that.
Yeah, he said, "Don't give me the money. You're a rich guy? Good. You give the money to the poor. And then when you're poor, you come follow me."
Yeah.
Okay? And my rich aunt will take care of you. My rich stepmother, she's a billionaire. She'll be happy to throw a couple of gold pieces your way. But basically, our whole attitude toward this, this whole Holy Blood, Holy Grail thing just totally distorts the evidence that's out there. Totally misrepresents what the story is. Now, you want to go into a second part here?
Yes, Olaf, I think that would be good because, the files get too large and a lot of people have trouble downloading. Okay, we will move to a part 2 of Bloodsuckers. And you've been listening to Olaf Hage. Please go to his website, TheTimeQuest.com. This is Georgianne Hughes on The Bite Show. Go to part 2.